episode 333 of Late Night Linux. I'm Joe, and with me are Phelim.
333 and a third.
Graham.
Good evening.
And Will.
Hello.
Coming up later, we're going to have a really interesting interview, but before we get started, just a shout out to everyone who noticed the surprise at the end of the last episode. If you missed it, you should go back and have a listen. Some of you were a bit confused about it, though. So, no, we didn't get hacked. It was an email that someone sent to us. And no, it wasn't AI. It was a fella from Fiverr who we got to read it out for 12 quid. Worth every penny. So yes, go and have a listen if you missed it. Right. Ages ago, Will, you told us about your quite convoluted Pi-hole setup, which I think used some sort of free tier on one of the cloud providers. And then off air recently, you mentioned that you've completely changed that. I want to know about all of your Pi-hole setups and your ad blocking generally, because I have just been using uBlock Origin in the browser and AdGuard's public DNS on my phone. And I'm getting a bit pissed off with AdGuard not having the flexibility. So I suppose, Will, you kick us off. What is your current ad blocking setup?
Let me explain first a little bit about why I had two servers. I was at that point running on a Raspberry Pi 2, maybe a Pi 1, and it just didn't have the horsepower to serve DNS at a reasonable speed. And so I had like local DNS on a local Pi, and then that Pi used another Pi hole with a massive advert blocking list in it as its upstream, effectively caching some of those common results locally. But yeah, I don't need that anymore. Pi 4 running on an SSD, more than good enough, and soon to be replaced by my mini PC. But yeah, so running it locally now is fine. It runs all of my DHCP and it runs all of my DNS for all of the clients on my LAN. I still do have AdBlock Origin installed on pretty much all the kids' PCs where they've got Firefox installed as well. But for things like my phone, where I can't necessarily install extensions, because it's an iPhone, I have about 6 or 7 different ad lists, and I'll pull them up in a moment after everybody else has had a go. And they block things like pop-up adverts and banner adverts on the majority, I will say, of websites. The point at which I really notice how bad the web has got is when I'm away from home on like 4G or something and browsing the web that way, that the number of adverts in amongst the content are so intrusive and so just, I don't know, they just break the whole flow of the page. You can't get rid of them. It's just terrible. I would never go back and not have Pi-hole at home.
Right, so you don't have access to that while you're out and about is the bottom line.
Correct. I could via a VPN, but I don't because I can't be bothered.
Right.
So my setup, I think, isn't quite as ambitious as Will's, but it's very similar. I've been through various iterations of this over the years. I did run Pi-hole as a snap. I ran it as a manual install for a long time. And now that I've kind of got a lot of things, or a few important things running in Docker with Portainer on my Wise PC, I now have Pi-hole running there, and I use it now just for DNS. In the past, I've used it for DHCP, but then I've had real problems when that server's gone and everybody complains to me endlessly while I'm probably in an important meeting. I've got just a few things, a few lists, but it blocks nearly everything I need. I find it incredibly useful. It's also useful in that, you know, if you use Google, you get the links to the sponsored links. None of the sponsored links work, which I like.
Yeah.
And everybody complains about it in the house, but I think I'm doing them a favor from stopping them clicking on the sponsored links as well. But otherwise, they don't realize it most of the time. And I think it's only probably when they leave the LAN that they realize what a shit mess the internet really is. And it's the same for me. And so much so that I connect via a VPN to my home network when I'm traveling, mainly for the ad blocking. And it works faultlessly. It's a really great project. And for YouTube, I do still run uBlock Origin on my browsers when I can. And I think I've mentioned Vinegar on macOS before. So I still run local ad blockers, but mostly the backbone is Pi-hole.
Right, and that's OpenVPN back to home then?
It is, yeah. I still use OpenVPN.
Right, yeah, fuck that. I'm not messing around with that.
Anecdotally, my wife also says when she's away, either at other people's houses or on wireless on her phone, how terrible the advert experience is. So, for what I would class a normal person to spot how worse the internet is without Pi-hole, I think that really shows the value of it.
Well, I've got a tip for iPhone users like you and your wife, and that is you can install AdGuard's public DNS on an iPhone. It's more complicated than on Android, where it's just going into menus and copy-pasting something, but you can do it. You have to install some certificate thing or something. And I did that on my iPad, and it's basically been fine. So I highly recommend that.
So I run mine on a Pi 2 still, and it does the job mainly. I only use I looked at now, I think I've only used 2 lists. So I might have to pinch a few off Will, because he seems to use an awful lot more, which might be handy. But I have had the best compliment ever from the family where they went off in the car and using a hotspot on one of the phones. The son was like, all the apps are really shite now, because they all obviously were ad-based apps that couldn't get the ads. And I have that there, and it gets its DNS requests off my OpenSense box, and I have been very tempted to do there's a bunch of these lists you can apply to the OpenSense and just have it do them from the source, but to be honest, it's just a case of getting around to it. And yeah, the Pi-hole is so handy in the fact that it's very easy to update. There's a very simple way to update it from a command line, which you can set in a cron job. And yeah, I think I even update all the gravity list stuff every 2 to 3 hours or something like that, just in case, because it is often funny where it'll block a Reddit IP despite you not wanting to.
No, you obviously want to block Reddit because Reddit's shit.
Well, sometimes there's some useful archive question data in there, though, for things like whatever, which is annoying because you just wish it was somewhere else, but they fall afoul of some of the lists every now and again. I don't know whether it's just various ad providers kind of using the same IP range as some other stuff. I don't know. But once you do the gravity update on Pi-hole, it then sorts it out and it's fine again. So I don't really understand. And yes, I probably should look into it, but I just can't be arsed. It does the job mainly.
But you can go into Pi-hole and allow list stuff, right?
Yeah, you can. I mean, I've had to do it with a few. So I would sign up for a couple of news lists, and they obviously use a lot of these mailing list managers where the mailing list manager is actually on the blacklist. And it's really annoying because then the person who runs the actual newsletter go, oh, you don't appear to be clicking on these links anymore. I'm going to trike you off the list if you don't reply by next week. And it's like, wow, just fuck off. Just send me the fucking email, you. Anyway. So it doesn't at all annoy me. I don't know why you'd even bring it up. But yeah, no. So you have to keep adding the odd whitelist in, which is a tad annoying, but it's not terrible. It's not the end of the world. It's better than all the shite you see on there.
You really need to get with the times, Phelim. It's allow list and block list these days.
Sorry. And you're right. It is. I'm very slow to change. I'll get round to it when it's changed again.
I think it's the Privacy Badger extension. It might be uBlock Origin, which intercepts those tracking links and says, in the browser, says, oh, did you know you've clicked on a tracking link? You can either go directly to the place that it wants to send you, bypassing the tracking link, or go via the normal tracking link mechanism. I don't know which extension it is, but I have one installed and it takes care of that because Tom Scott's mailing list always had deep embedded tracking links in them. And I got so fucked off with it that I stopped reading it and read it on RSS now. Much easier.
Well, it's uBlock Origin because I've seen that with the Andertons YouTube channel, which is guitar stuff mostly. And if you click through to the products that they're talking about, they have all sorts of tracking on that. And it's exactly as you say, you can just click to the actual thing that you want rather than their bullshit tracking.
Good job, uBlock Origin.
Indeed, yes. I'm quite disappointed that none of you seem to leave the house or use your phone when you leave the house, at least, apart from Graham with his crusty old OpenVPN, because I've thought about doing it with Tailscale, who obviously sponsor us, but I've read about PiVPN, which I think integrates nicely with Pi-hole. So I thought about trying that. So I don't know, I need to do some experiments, but I kind of wanted to talk to you lot first. I was hoping you'd have a really simple solution because, yeah, Pi-hole on the LAN is very, very straightforward to do, but just that extra step of doing it with the VPN is the thing that I haven't really decided on yet.
Well, I have done it with Tailscale, and it was very easy. I've got my Pi-hole server as the exit node, and I've just stuck the Tailscale client on my phone, and at the click of a button, I can enable Tailscale, route all the traffic through my Pi-hole, and exit on my whatever my public IP is at home. I just don't do it all the time, and I don't know why. I probably should do, but it works perfectly and is really easy to set up. So Tailscale for the win.
I logged on to Twitter, or whatever the fuck it's called now. Anyway, to see if it works. So half the time, I don't get pictures and I don't get videos because Pi-hole blocks them depending on, I think, again, whatever block of stuff is triggered at the moment. Now, ironically, I logged on right now, working like a charm, but there's an oftentimes where I will see like just black boxes for videos. And when I click on them, it just goes, nah, I can't get that. And it breaks.
What's that phrase? And nothing of value was lost.
Well, yeah, although I just have pinged in our chat that the Antichrist is trending at 22.2 thousand posts. So I don't know if maybe this podcast doesn't make it out tomorrow.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by Tailscale. Go to tailscale.com/LNL. Tailscale is a proper VPN for connecting your devices and infrastructure together. Not something that's marketed at people watching foreign streaming services or who want to hide their browsing habits from coffee shop staff. It's the easiest way to connect devices and services to each other wherever they are. PCs and laptops, servers, cloud instances, 3D printers, network storage. Connect anything and everything you want, wherever it is, and get started in minutes. Tailscale's personal plan will always be free, and you get up to 100 devices and 3 users for free with no credit card required. The free personal plan is enough for me to send my offsite backups to my parents' house and to get into my LAN while I'm out and about. But what gave me the confidence to start relying on Tailscale was their straightforward business model. If you want to use Tailscale at an industrial scale, with more users and devices, or take advantage of features like MDM policies, auditing, network flow logging, and priority support, you can join over 10,000 companies as a paying customer. So support the show and go to tailscale.com/LNL and try Tailscale out at home or at work today. That's tailscale.com/LNL. I'm now joined by Alex Moore from Open Web Advocacy. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here.
So what exactly is Open Web Advocacy?
Open Web Advocacy is we're a non-profit, and our goal is to improve browser competition and to allow web apps to compete fairly with their native counterparts primarily on mobile devices, so on Android and iOS. Our organization was formed because the mobile web has largely been squeezed out of mobile devices, and the native ecosystems are extremely dominant. And if you look at desktop, 70% of all apps now are web-based. They're web-based apps, or they're web-based in a native wrapper, but that just hasn't happened on mobile because of anti-competitive behavior, mostly by Apple, but also a little bit by Google as well.
And OWA is completely independent then?
Yes, we're a completely independent not-profit, and I'm very happy to say we're not funded by any of the gatekeepers. So we're not receiving money from Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Meta. We're entirely donation-based. We advocate for a mix between web developers, the web, and consumers. And so we're an unusual advocacy group in that we take various things into consideration, and we're all about the future of the web is our focus.
So what I wanted to talk to you about was Google and the Department of Justice case against Google, which on the face of it seems like it could be quite good. Regulating Google, breaking them up, that sort of thing, sounds great. But it's a bit more complicated than that, and there are some kind of side effects that maybe haven't been taken into consideration.
That summary is actually very accurate. In general, the DOJ found that Google is a monopolist and has been acting as one to maintain its monopoly in the area of search. And that has a lot of damaging impacts on customers. So that could be maybe you get more adverts, you get less search results, you get lower quality search results because there's not that competition pushing Google to improve their product. And that's on the consumer side. And on the advertiser side, obviously, you've got higher prices for advertising because there isn't the same level of competition to push the price down. The DOJ has come up with a huge list of remedies, and there's about 45 of them, and most of them are really good. Like they're good remedies that we think they're going to help fix search competition. But there's a couple that we've got concerns about. And then just to give you some examples of this, they're things like cancelling agreements with handset manufacturers to push Google Search and Google Chrome and bundle their apps together. Things like allowing syndication with other search engines so that they can get into the market, and then banning revenue sharing deals between Google and other browser vendors. And then the last one is forcing the sale of Chrome and banning Google from re-entering the browser market for 10 years. And that's the one we're most concerned about.
But that last one sounds great on the surface of things. Get Chrome out of the hands of Google, get it to be independent. Surely that's a good thing, isn't it?
Well, yeah, no, and I think that's what's blindsided everybody, is because it does sound, on the face of it, it does sound really good, because Google is using Chrome as an entry point for search, and their dominance in the browser market helps reinforce their dominance in search. And you think, if you just look on the face value, you think, well, okay, there's all these other browsers, those other browsers can compete. Where it becomes problematic is that browser competition's not quite like that. And the reality is we only have three major browser engines, which is Apple's WebKit, Mozilla's Gecko, and Chromium, which is 90% funded by Google. And so you start thinking all the other browsers like Microsoft Edge, Opera, Brave, Vivaldi, they're all using Chromium, and all of that's currently funded. 90% of that is funded by Google.
And so if they are forced to get rid of Chrome, you don't think that it'll still be funded to the same extent then?
To answer that question, we really need to sort of imagine a scenario where we're going to sell Chrome. And the issue is Chrome has billions of users. So to another party, it would be worth a lot of money. But the issue is it's going to be very expensive to purchase. And, that could be 20 billion, or if in the recent court case, I think it was valued at close to 50 billion. I think DuckDuckGo was estimating. But the issue is if you purchase it at that amount, then you're going to be under immense pressure to make returns on that investment. And you're going to have a revenue stream, and you're going to have to make sure that your costs aren't enormous. Currently, we estimate that Google has about 2,000 employees that work on both Chrome, which is the browser, and Chromium/Blink, which is the underlying browser engine, and that any purchaser of Chrome wouldn't be incentivized to continue that funding because they have to deliver a return on investment. And so the question then becomes, well, who's going to buy it? The ideal buyer is going to have really deep financial resources. They're going to have very strong technical capability and a strategic incentive to keep the web open and competitive. But it's really unclear if that sort of buyer exists.
Let Sam Altman buy it. That'll be fine.
Well, yeah. In fact, OpenAI is one of the companies that have expressed interest in purchasing Chrome.
Yeah.
But I think you've got to think, are they going to be a good custodian for the web? Now, one of the great things about the web is you get this direct website to customer or business to customer relationship. And with AI, it's almost like they might end up disintermediating the websites. And so it's not obvious that selling to a company like OpenAI would actually be beneficial to the web.
Well, no, it was a joke, wasn't it? That would be probably one of the worst possible companies. The company that has open in their name and does nothing open at all would be terrible for the open web, surely.
Yes, and it's also not even obvious they'd be willing to invest the amount needed to keep the web platform up to date. So at the moment, we're estimating that Chrome and Chromium cost about $2 billion annually to develop, both the browser and all the and the web platform, which, every website and every web app relies on, not just within Chromium, but it also extends over to the other browsers as well, because a lot of this standards work actually originates at Google.
Right.
Another party we could think about that does have a lot of interest in the web would be Microsoft. But then after the noughties Microsoft IE6 case, I don't think it would be a good look for the DOJ to then sell Chrome to Microsoft, because then you would have basically a monopoly in terms of the full stack from operating system to browser. And they also have their own search engine as well. So it's really be like taking it from one monopolist and giving it to another. And the thing is, if you think about all these purchases, it's entirely rational for the buyer of Chrome to slash all the funding for the web platform. And the reason is that it doesn't generate them short-term profits. It wouldn't go to zero, but the funding could be reduced just to keep Chrome at least minimally secure and functional. But then you start to have to look at that in terms of the web versus the native ecosystems, like on Android and iOS. And you would think that would become significantly less competitive over time, which would just cement both Google's and Apple's dominance in the software platform market.
But would it not then potentially be good for Mozilla? Would they not have more of a chance to influence standards and everything if they were spending more than whoever owns Chrome now in this hypothetical situation?
The main issue that Mozilla has overall is revenue. Our viewpoint on Mozilla is Mozilla got squeezed out of the mobile market. So basically, Apple didn't allow Mozilla to ship their own engine, which made it very hard for Mozilla to differentiate their product on mobile. And they've got an absolutely tiny percentage on iOS. Had in 2011, 2012, they'd been allowed to ship a real browser with extensions, they could have had a huge percentage of the mobile browsing market. But they essentially got squeezed out.
Well, hang on. They've not done very well on Android, where they can do whatever they like. And yeah, Android has not got the prestige of iOS with young people in the West, but there are billions of Android users out there.
Android is not a fair system either. When device manufacturers sign up with Android, they have to sign up to these MADA agreements, which basically force you to bundle 12 of Google's apps with the device. And they cover things like revenue sharing and placement of those apps. And one of those is placing Chrome in the most prominent position in the OS, and also the AGSA, which is the Android Google search app, in the center of Android devices, which then direct people directly to Google search. And so if you think about, how could Firefox compete on Android, it's extremely difficult. So you've got iOS, which is the primary revenue source, and they can't ship their own engine. And then you've got Android, which has MADA, which squeezes the other browsers out. So it's not surprising they weren't successful on either. And you need both. You need both because the market is across iOS and Android. And if you're missing one of them, then it significantly drops your funding.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by Entroware. Go to entroware.com. Entroware sells laptops, desktops, and servers with Ubuntu pre-installed. Most parts are configurable, so you can pick the CPU, RAM, and storage that's right for you. If you can't find exactly what you're looking for, then do contact them and they'll work with you on a bespoke solution that's perfect for your needs. They ship to the UK, Republic of Ireland, France, Germany, Italy, and Spain. And if you do buy one of their machines, there's a little drop-down at checkout where you can select Late Night Linux so they'll know that we sent you. So go to entroware.com for all your Linux computing needs. You've written extensively about how this is going to be bad news for Mozilla, kind of no matter which way you look at it, right?
So you could make an argument that the remedies might give Mozilla a greater ability to compete. But the issue is that because Google has been dominant for so long and they have this monopoly over search, that Mozilla's funding is entirely reliant on revenue from Google. And that you can't just switch it to another funding source immediately overnight. It's going to need a competitive search market for there to be enough purchasers for Mozilla to actually sign search engine deals. Now, the remedy that the DOJ is proposing is no search engine revenue sharing deals at all, which means Google will be banned from giving any money to Mozilla in return for setting the default search engine. But the problem with that is that is the vast majority of Mozilla's revenue stream. And our argument is that, is it really worth dropping Google's market share by 0.75%? And then in return for that, you basically kill off Mozilla, which still plays a very important role in standards, and it's the sort of custodian of just one of the three remaining browser engines, when it's not going to have that much effect on search.
Right, but if this does happen, and as you say, it would have a negligible effect on Google's actual market share, but let's say this does happen, and so Mozilla are just completely knackered, basically. They've got no money coming in at all. They're going to need to do a deal with someone else. So, for example, with Microsoft to set Bing as the default. And sure, that's not going to pay anywhere near as highly as Google, but could Mozilla not just kind of, tighten their belts a bit, become a bit more efficient, maybe spend a little bit less on, management and executives and, just be a bit leaner?
We've actually gone through Mozilla's finances, and the majority of Mozilla's finances is still spent on engineering. There's another line item which includes management expenses, but the majority of that goes to sort of marketing and that sort of stuff. Maintaining browser engines is incredibly expensive. Browsers are in the order of complexity as operating systems. And we would say that Mozilla's budget at the moment is too low for them to stay competitive. If anything, Mozilla needs to double its income to maintain competitiveness with both Chrome, Chromium, and WebKit. And so a drop in revenue will probably end up being a downward spiral, because you have less revenue, you have less engineers. That means you can't build as many features and functionalities, which will end up over a number of years being a huge gap between their browser engine and the other browser engines. So they don't have the option of losing more revenue. We're really at the sort of lowest point at the moment. If Bing comes along and offers them a deal, if Google's not competing for that default search engine placement, that's also going to lower the amount that Microsoft's going to be willing to pay, because they're not going to be in competition with the other major search engine to get those spots.
We've talked quite a lot about the DOJ remedies that you disagree with, but you don't disagree with the whole thing, right?
No.
It's just that you feel that there should be carve-outs for some of the smaller players like Mozilla.
Yeah, in fact, I'll go further than that. I'd say we agree with the vast majority of all of the remedies. In fact, we identified about 40 to 45 separate remedies in their proposal, and nearly all of them we think will be positive. One of the ones is, although we agree with carve-outs for the smaller browsers because they will get bankrupted without this revenue, carve-outs for enough time for a new search market to take off, and then for these browsers to get alternative revenue streams. But the biggest one is that we agree with is probably Google's got this deal with Apple where they get paid around $20 billion per year just to set the default search engine in Safari. And that deal is so enormous in scale that 50% of search traffic happens via Apple devices in the United States. That deal also undermines browser competition as well, because basically Google pays for search traffic on iOS, not only in Safari, but in Chrome as well. So there's very little incentive for Google to try and gain meaningful market share on iOS, because they've got what they want, which is search. And then that means that they're not pushing really hard to get against Safari, which then leads to sort of an underinvestment in Safari. And I suppose the other remedy we really agree with as well is cancelling the key elements of the Matter agreements, which are the agreements between Google and the Android device manufacturers, which basically say that Google Search and Chrome should not have to be bundled with Google Play and give them prominent positions on all of those devices, which will provide an opportunity for competitors to compete. Because right now on Android, Android's kind of set up to drive people towards Google search, which sort of helps cement their dominance. There's also another remedy as well for syndication, which we think is really good, which basically allows other search engines to query Google to say, if you got this search term, what search results would you return? Which means that they're not at a disadvantage in returning good search results. And then over time, they can build up their own search engine capability so they won't even need the syndication eventually.
So what do you think is going to happen? Not what you want to happen, but what do you think is going to happen? Are Mozilla just toast or what?
It really depends on what the judge decides. Last week in court, Mozilla made their case that this is going to be very difficult for them if they're not allowed to do a revenue share deal with Google. And then it just comes down to what the judge thinks. If the judge thinks their position is reasonable, then he might allow a carve out, or he might not. We don't know what the judge thinks. If the judge decides that they can't get revenue from Google any longer, then I think that would be a death spiral for Mozilla. I can't see them getting an alternative revenue source that's going to pay close to $500 million a year in a short enough time that's going to let them fund their organization and keep funding all the tools and technologies that they need to keep Mozilla competitive.
And Mozilla has pissed off quite a lot of people recently with various decisions they've made, and people are kind of running off to use forks of Firefox, downstream forks, but that's not going to help, is it? If the money plug gets pulled on Mozilla, the downstream forks are not really going to exist, right?
No, people underestimate just how much work is involved in building a browser and browser engine. If the funding gets cut, I cannot see any of the downstream forks surviving, or they'll have to switch to a WebKit or Chromium to continue their browser.
Or just maintain Gecko kind of where it is and maybe patch the odd security hole. But web standards move so quickly that that's just not feasible long term, right? No,
not feasible long term. And even that's what Microsoft found when they were switching to their own Edge HTML engine, is that they just weren't able to gain enough market share from the web developers to deal with the compatibility issues that were occurring. And that was one of the things that drove their switch to Blink and Chromium.
So I've asked you what you think will happen, but let's try and be a bit more positive. What do you want the DOJ to do?
We believe there's a way to protect the web platform and fix Google's monopoly on search. So there are a bunch of options that are open. So the first, which we think relatively easy thing they could do, is just have a small carve out for small browser vendors in a sort of tapered way, that if they become big, that they reduce the amount that they can sell to Google. In terms of the Chrome separation, there are two things the DOJ could do. Either cancel the Chrome separation and then perhaps move it into a separate company under Alphabet rather than be within Google, and then set their search deals with Google at 50%, which would force Chrome would then have to sell off 50% of all default search entry points to other search engines, which would have a big effect on competition. And the other one that they could do is, if they are going to sell Chrome, is that add minimum investment conditions into Chromium, that the buyer has to invest at least the same or similar amounts of what Google invests into Chromium for at least the next 5 years. And then that way you would at least get a buyer who would be willing to invest that money in the open web. At the moment, though, we're unsure who that buyer would be. So it's probably not separating Chrome and then placing additional conditions on it within Alphabet would probably be the better option. And then obviously all the other remedies that the DOJ is pursuing, we'd agree with, and would be good if they actually went ahead with them.
Well, it's been absolutely great talking to you, Alex. Thank you very much for joining me. If people want to learn more about OWA, presumably the website's the best place to start.
Yeah, that's just open-web-advocacy.org. And we've got documents that go into all of these topics in a lot of detail. And we're also very interested in people want to come help out and push for a better future of the open web.
Great. Well, I'll put a link to the website in the show notes and hopefully speak to you again sometime.
Yeah, no, not at all. Thank you very much for having me on. And greatly appreciate it.
Right, well, we better get out of here then. We'll be back next week when who knows what it will be. But until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Phelan.
I've been Graham.
And I've been Will.
See you later.